There's a lot of work in Qatar right now to develop a local fan base, but they simply don't have the numbers in the country to develop it effectively. And so we've actually argued in a different forum than this one that one of the things Qatar should consider doing is trying to integrate the migrant worker population into the sport world more than they are now. You heard my colleague Vibhav's comment about how they have a workers' cup, so they're having sports for workers, but they're keeping it separate. That instead they've got a couple, like 1.5 million people there that have very few leisure time activities. That if they would figure out ways of integrating them effectively into a fan community, they actually could go towards solving this problem a lot, because the international fan base is going to be difficult to attract.
Qatari's population consists for the most part of migrant workers. Only 300,000 of the total 2 million inhabitants are native Qatari, which makes the Qatari a minority in their own country.
It's just in the culture, going to live matches isn't something that's done so much. People are far more likely to watch in their modulus, watch at the coffee shop, rather than go to live matches. So there's, for example, they've started a Qatar Stars League, which is a local league of teams, to try to encourage more of a fan base and a fan community. But you still don't have enough critical mass in the Qatari community or the non-migrant labor, kind of the more Western expat population. Those numbers aren't big enough to really fill the stadia.
I think the media discourse generally has been very, very poor about Qatar.
An example is the coverage of the Washington Post on the number of work-related deaths in Qatar. The graphic stated that more than 1,000 workers died in Qatar since 2010 while working on the infrastructure for the World Cup. This data is incorrect because they use data for all migrant deaths in Qatar. According to the World Cup Supreme Committee, there had been no stadium deaths. Construction work of the World Cup only accounts for 1% of all construction work in Qatar.
Thousands and thousands of column inches have been written about the country in the World Cup. Books have been written by people who have never been to the country. And, it's not a difficult place to get to. It's not a particularly repressive regime. You can go there, you can see for yourself. You can walk into worker barracks, which is what I did. I travelled independently. I'm a freelance journalist. I paid for my own trip. And it's inexcusable that mainstream newspapers, TV stations, radio stations can have all these views without going and finding out for themselves.
Conservative Qatari laws can also be an extra deterrent for international fans visiting the World Cup. Strict alcohol-related laws and laws concerning public displays of affection are very different from laws in most Western countries.
It's a much more conservative country. There's suggestions for dress, so you don't go around for example, with a bare midriff. You don't go in spaghetti straps. You should have, for men and women, shoulders should be covered, and things like that that are just not, if you're from a European or a Western background, just aren't what we typically do. So I think it's incumbent upon visitors to countries to educate themselves about those things, and I don't think it's difficult to find out about Qatar. I think boycotts are quite possible. I mean, there was already calls for boycotts over the availability of alcohol.
The global community will focus upon issues like labour rights. I'm sure they will focus on the environmental record of the country too in the run-up to the World Cup and other aspects of Qatar's foreign policy. My personal view is that the World Cup should have been held in the USA. I think it had the strongest bid, and the FIFA Executive Committee, i.e. its board, should have reflected that economic case in its decision. My feeling is that that FIFA Executive Committee that made the decision in 2010 was incapable of making an honest decision. That's not to say that Qatar bought their World Cup or Brazil bought it. I just think that other vested interests in terms of the global political economy, business interests, personal friendships, other relationships played a part in Qatar winning the host decision, and also, of course, the supreme football politician Mohammed bin Hammam played a very important role too. Qatar 2022, the Supreme Committee, and also the Qatar government has got to take some share of the blame. Perhaps its media strategy hasn't been so good. The Qatari government's media strategy hasn't been so good, but it needs to face up to people's concerns and answer them. And the rest of the world also needs to take a more holistic and broader view of what's going on in the country ahead of the tournament.